drawings come to life. Very exciting. Now, okay, we're going to do a little experiment today. You may have seen this on YouTube or done this yourself, but we're going to explore different kind of compounds, hydrophobic and hydrophilic compounds actually today. And we're going to look at an expo marker, and you may have done this before, but if you take an expo marker and you write it on a piece of glass, say for example this glass here, my glass pie plates, you might be familiar with this. You know that dry erase markers erase really, really easily. And that makes it easy for your teachers to write on the board. But if we add water, something kind of fun happens. A little more. He dances, see? Whee! Can you see him? And then I'll do another one over here. And you can just see it detached, just comes right off the plate. Oh, his arm came off too. How horrible. And so you can see them floating around, very easy to do. It's very hard to get them to rotate around, but there's one guy. And there's the other one. My drawings come to life. Very exciting. Now, we want to talk about why this is. What is the nature going on here with these little stick figure guys? Now, I've also noticed that these thinner ones, these thinner markers, they don't work. They won't detach, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. The fat ones, though, they seem to work pretty well. So, kind of fun little experiment, and we'll talk about why that is. All right, let's talk about expo markers, like we were talking about today. We've got the expo markers that we were using in our little experiment, and then you've got the Sharpie. Woe to the teacher that mistakes the Sharpie for their expo marker on their whiteboard, because you know if you write on the whiteboard with a Sharpie, it's not coming off. But yet the expo marker wipes off so easily. And the question is, why on earth is that? Why does this marker never come off the whiteboard, but the expo markers come off super, super easy? So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to see what's the difference between these two kinds of markers, and how did it make those little guys float in the water? Well, the first thing we want to talk about is what is in a marker in the first place. Well, the first thing is you've got your pigments or your dyes, right? You've got some kind of color, whether it's green or black. In fact, actually, you find out that the reds, the blues, and the greens have all sorts of colors in them. It's not just red. The Sharpie also has the same thing. It's got pigments. These pigments, though, need to be floating in something. It's a liquid, right? So they have what we call a solvent, something that dissolves that pigment and allows it to float. But you don't want it to stay wet, right? You want it to dry real quick. So you need a solvent that evaporates very, very fast. And so they tend to use alcohol. Alcohol is pretty volatile. It means it evaporates really, really quickly. So alcohol is kind of their go-to solvent that they kind of float this liquid in, and these pigments and dyes. But the next thing is, if you're a Sharpie, you want the pigment to stick. You've got to get it to stay on the material you're writing on. And so they actually use something called acrylic. And they called it acrylic polymer. And a polymer is really just a word for a long chain of repeating compounds, so over and over and over. Glues, like white glue, Elmer's glue, is a polymer. Now, Expo also uses a polymer, except they don't want it to stick. They want it to come off. So they use an oily silicone polymer. And the reason they use this is so it doesn't stick to anything. And if you guys have ever mixed like vinegar and oil together, you know vinegar, which is mostly water, does not mix with oil. So what you have here is you have a system where oil and water, we know, don't mix at all, right? They stay apart. And so by using an oily silicone polymer in the expo marker, it won't stick. So when you go to wipe it off, it comes right off the board. The key component, though, the key thing you need is it's got to be non-porous. If you have a, there can't be any holes. It can't be a rough surface. It needs to be very, very smooth, which is why teachers use whiteboards. If you were to write that Expo dry erase marker on your T-shirt, it might stain it permanently because it'll absorb right. It'll get right into your cloth there, which would be not great. So the difference between your Sharpie marker and your Expo marker is simply this chemical polymer they put in it. This makes it stick to the surface, and this makes it slippery, so it comes right off. And that is how your Expo and your Sharpie markers work. And that's it. And that's why the water and the oil don't mix, so your pigment and your salt, everything just kind of floats right away, and your little guy is just kind of floating away on your thing. All right. Hope that helps explain how Expo and Sharpie markers and all that work.